A man adopts the most hated puppy at the shelter, and when he realizes why, he bursts into tears. At first, it looks like just a broken dog nobody wanted, but the moment those sharp eyes lock onto a stranger's boots, everything changes. This isn't just a rescue, it's the beginning of a dangerous mystery hiding in plain sight. Every snarl, every scar, every moment of fear points to something far bigger than anyone dares to imagine. And as secrets buried in fire and steel begin to surface, one question haunts everything. What dark truth does this hated puppy carry? And how far will someone go to keep it hidden? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The county animal shelter stood like a weathered sentinel at the edge of town, its faded brick walls and rusted chain-link fences telling stories of countless animals who had passed through its doors. On this grey November morning, Harlan Pike's worn work boots scraped against the concrete as he made his way to the entrance, each step feeling heavier than the last. 3 months had passed since Sarah's death, but the weight of her absence still pressed against his chest like a physical thing. Their small house had grown too quiet, the silence broken only by the ticking of the wall clock she'd loved so much. Even his repair shop, usually a sanctuary of purpose and routine, felt empty without her dropping by with coffee and her bright smile. The shelter's glass door creaked as Harlan pulled it open, bringing with it a rush of warm air carrying the mixed scents of disinfectant and animal life. A bell chimed overhead, and a young woman with kind eyes looked up from her desk. "Good morning," she said, setting aside a stack of papers. "I'm Jenny. How can I help you today?" Harlan cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how long it had been since he'd had a real conversation with anyone. "I'm looking for a dog. For company, I suppose." Jenny's face softened with understanding. She'd seen that look before, the slight slump of shoulders, the hesitation in the voice that spoke of loss. "Of course. Would you like to see our available dogs?" Harlan nodded, following her through a door that led to the kennel area. The cacophony of barking hit him like a wave, and he instinctively tensed. But as they walked past the rows of chain-link runs, he found himself drawn to the various faces, some eager, some shy, all hoping for a chance at a new home. "We have quite a few wonderful dogs ready for adoption," Jenny explained, gesturing to the kennels. "This is Max, he's great with kids. And here's Luna, she's a bit older but very gentle." But Harlan's attention had already drifted to the last kennel in the row. Unlike the others, this one was set slightly apart, and a large red warning sign was posted on the gate. Inside, a brindled dog lay in the corner, head resting on paws, watching them with intense eyes. "What about that one?" Harlan asked, moving closer despite Jenny's sudden intake of breath. "Oh, that's Keel," she said, her cheerful tone faltering. "I wouldn't recommend him. He's had some behavioral issues. He's bitten several people, including 2 of our staff members." As if on cue, the dog's ears pricked forward at the sound of his name. Harlan noticed a long scar running down one of his front legs, partially hidden by the brindled fur. There was something in those eyes that called to him, not aggression, but a deep wariness that seemed to mirror his own. "What's his story?" Harlan asked, not taking his eyes off the dog. Jenny shifted uncomfortably. "He was found as a stray about 6 months ago. We don't know much about his background, but he's been difficult. Most people won't even go near his kennel anymore." At that moment, the shelter director, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Hartley, appeared in the doorway. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her sharp gaze moving between Jenny, Harlan, and Keel. "Mr. Pike was just looking at our available dogs," Jenny explained quickly. "Then I suggest you show him the others," Mrs. Hartley said firmly. "That one's not suitable for adoption." "He's dangerous." But Harlan had already crouched down near the kennel gate. Keel had risen to his feet and taken a few cautious steps forward, his movements fluid despite the old injury. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Harlan felt something shift inside him, a recognition of shared pain, perhaps, or simply the first stirring of purpose he'd felt since Sarah's death. "I'd like to meet him," Harlan said quietly. The director's face hardened. "Sir, that would be extremely unwise. This dog has a history of aggression. We've had multiple incidents." "I understand the risks," Harlan interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "But I'd still like to meet him." A couple looking at a puppy in a nearby kennel snickered, exchanging knowing looks. Mrs. Hartley's lips pressed into a thin line, but after a long moment, she gave a curt nod to Jenny. "Get the catch pole," she instructed, "and have Miguel stand by." Jenny returned with a long pole with a loop at the end, a tool used to control aggressive dogs, and a muscular shelter worker named Miguel. The preparation felt excessive to Harlan, but he said nothing as they carefully opened the kennel door. To everyone's surprise, Keel didn't lunge or growl. He stood perfectly still, watching Harlan with those intelligent eyes. When Harlan slowly extended his hand, palm up, the dog took a tentative step forward, then another. "Sir, please be careful," Mrs. Hartley warned, but her voice seemed distant to Harlan. Keel's nose touched Harlan's fingers, and time seemed to stop. The dog's breath was warm against his skin, and Harlan could feel the slight tremor running through the animal's body. Then, ever so slowly, Keel's tongue flicked out, giving Harlan's hand a single careful lick. "I'll take him," Harlan said. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Hartley cleared her throat. "Mr. Pike, I cannot in good conscience allow this adoption. This dog is not safe." "With all due respect," Harlan interrupted, still looking at Keel, "I think he just needs a chance. Someone to trust him. He's bitten 4 people," Mrs. Hartley insisted. "He's liable to be put down if he does it again. We'd be setting you both up for failure." Harlan finally stood, turning to face her. Maybe. Or maybe he just needs someone who understands what it's like to be alone. More snickers from the couple by the puppies, but Harlan ignored them. Mrs. Hartley studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed. "I'll need you to sign additional liability waivers," she said, "and understand that if there are any incidents, any at all—" "There won't be," Harlan said with quiet certainty. The paperwork took nearly an hour, with Mrs. Hartley pointing out every possible risk and requirement in excruciating detail. Through it all, Harlan remained patient, signing where indicated and listening to the warnings about proper containment, training, and the shelter's right to reclaim the dog if things went wrong. Jenny helped him gather some basic supplies, a collar, leash, food bowl, and a small bag of kibble to get started. When they returned to Keel's kennel, the dog was waiting alertly, as if he knew what was happening. This time, when they opened the kennel door, Keel walked straight to Harlan and sat at his feet. The shelter staff watched in disbelief as Harlan calmly slipped the collar over the dog's head and attached the leash. "I don't understand," Mrs. Hartley muttered. "He's never been this calm with anyone." Harlan didn't try to explain. He couldn't have put it into words if he'd tried. This feeling that somehow he and this unwanted dog were meant to find each other. As they walked toward the exit, Keel stayed close to his side, neither pulling ahead nor lagging behind. At the front desk, Jenny handed him a folder containing Keel's medical records and adoption papers. "Good luck," she said softly, and Harlan could see genuine hope in her eyes, despite her earlier reservations. The November air felt different when they stepped outside, clearer somehow, full of possibility. Harlan's old pickup truck sat waiting in the parking lot, and he opened the passenger door, patting the seat. Keel looked at him for a moment, then gracefully jumped up, settling himself as if he'd done it 100 times before. As Harlan walked around to the driver's side, he caught his reflection in the window. For the first time in months, he didn't see just grief in his own eyes. There was something else there now. Purpose, maybe, or the beginning of healing. He started the engine, and Keel turned to look at him, those intelligent eyes seeming to ask, "What now?" "Well, boy," Harlan said quietly, "I guess we'll figure it out together." As they pulled out of the shelter parking lot, leaving behind the disapproving stares and doubtful whispers, Harlan felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. It was small and fragile, like a spark in the darkness, but it was there. The road home stretched before them, and Keel watched the world pass by through the window, his posture relaxed but alert. Every now and then he would glance at Harlan, as if making sure his new person was still there. And each time, Harlan would reach over and gently touch his head, a silent reassurance that they were in this together now. They were both damaged, both carrying scars visible and invisible. But maybe, Harlan thought, that's exactly why they needed each other. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes the most feared creatures are the ones most in need of love. The old pickup truck rumbled down the familiar streets, carrying its two wounded souls toward home and whatever tomorrow might bring. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Harlan Pike felt like he was moving forward instead of just existing. It wasn't much, just a man and a dog that nobody wanted. But it was a start, and sometimes that's all you need. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Harlan guided his old pickup truck out of the animal shelter's driveway. Keel sat in the passenger seat, his brindled coat catching glints of golden light. The dog's posture remained alert but less tense than it had been inside the shelter, his intelligent eyes taking in every detail of their journey home. "We'll get you settled in soon enough," Harlan said softly, glancing at his new companion. The dog's ears twitched at his voice, but his gaze remained fixed on the road ahead. They were about halfway home when Harlan needed to stop at the local hardware store for some basic supplies, a proper dog bed, food bowls, and other essentials. He pulled into the small strip mall parking lot, choosing a spot near the entrance. "Just a quick stop, boy. Won't be long." As Harlan opened his door, a delivery truck rumbled into the adjacent loading zone. A burly man in work boots hopped down from the cab, clipboard in hand. The instant the delivery man's boots hit the pavement, Keel's entire demeanor changed. The dog's body went rigid, his hackles rising along his spine. A low, threatening growl emanated from deep in his chest, a sound that made the hair on Harlan's arms stand up. Before he could react, Keel launched himself across the seat toward the open driver's side door, barking furiously. "Whoa! Easy, boy." Harlan quickly grabbed Keel's collar, struggling to contain the suddenly aggressive dog. The delivery man backed away, raising his clipboard like a shield. "Better keep that monster under control," the man shouted, his work boots scuffing against the asphalt as he retreated. That's when it hit Harlan. The smell. A sharp chemical odor wafted from the direction of the delivery truck and the man's clothes. Something about that particular scent triggered a memory that stopped Harlan's heart for a moment. Sarah's last voicemail. He could hear her voice as clearly as if she were standing right beside him. "Honey, something's not right at the Miller site. That chemical stink is everywhere, and the paperwork doesn't match what I'm seeing. I'm going to do one more check and then—" The message had ended there. 3 hours later, the warehouse had gone up in flames. Keel continued straining against his grip, but the dog's reaction now took on a completely different meaning. Harlan guided him back into the truck and quickly closed the door, his hands shaking slightly as he processed what had just happened. "It's okay, boy," he murmured, though his own heart was racing. "You're safe now." Once they were both back in the truck, Harlan took a moment to really look at his new companion. The dog was still agitated, but his aggressive display had subsided into nervous vigilance. As Keel shifted in the seat, Harlan noticed something he hadn't seen clearly in the dim shelter lighting, a long, jagged scar running down the dog's foreleg. The sight of that scar triggered another memory, this one from about 6 months ago. Sarah had come home late one evening, more upset than he'd ever seen her. She'd found an injured puppy at one of her inspection sites. A brindled coat, she'd said, with the sweetest eyes despite being terrified. The poor thing was hiding under some equipment, she'd told him over dinner. Someone had hurt him badly. I got him to the emergency vet and then to a shelter, but I couldn't stop thinking about what kind of person would do that to an innocent animal. Harlan's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Could it be? He reached over slowly, letting Keel sniff his hand before gently running his fingers along the scar tissue. The dog allowed the touch, even leaning slightly into his hand. "It was you," Harlan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah found you first." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just any dog from the shelter. This was the same puppy his wife had rescued, the one she'd talked about for weeks afterward. The same dog who had just reacted so strongly to that chemical smell. Tears began rolling down Harlan's cheeks before he even realized he was crying. All the grief he'd been holding back, all the questions about Sarah's death, suddenly crystallized around this one impossible connection. Keel whined softly and moved closer, resting his head against Harlan's leg. For several long minutes they sat there in the parking lot, man and dog connected by the memory of a woman who had tried to help them both. Harlan stroked Keel's head, noting how the dog's earlier aggression had completely disappeared, replaced by a gentle, comforting presence. "She knew, didn't she?" Harlan said quietly. "She knew something wasn't right at those construction sites." "And you?" He looked down at Keel's intelligent eyes. "You recognized that smell?" "The same chemicals that were there when you got hurt." The hardware store forgotten, Harlan started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot. His mind was racing with possibilities, connections he'd been too grief-stricken to make before. Sarah's concerns about the construction site inspections, her final voicemail, and now this dog who reacted so strongly to specific chemical scents. It couldn't all be coincidence. As they drove home, Harlan felt something shift inside him. The overwhelming grief that had been his constant companion these past months began to transform into something else. Purpose. Sarah had died trying to uncover something dangerous, something wrong. And now, through some twist of fate, he had ended up with the very dog who might be a key to understanding what she had discovered. "We're going to figure this out," he promised, both to himself and to Keel. "Whatever Sarah found, whatever she was trying to expose, we're going to finish what she started." Keel's tail thumped against the seat, once, twice. The dog's eyes remained fixed on Harlan's face, as if he understood every word. The late afternoon sun caught his brindled coat again, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Harlan felt something besides grief stirring in his heart. Hope, purpose, and a deep connection to this dog who had somehow found his way back into his life. The rest of the drive home passed in contemplative silence, but it was different now. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with possibilities, with questions that needed answers, and with the steady presence of a dog who had already become so much more than just a shelter adoption. As they pulled into the driveway of his modest home, Harlan realized that what had started as a simple attempt to ease his loneliness had become something far more significant. He and Keel weren't just a man and his dog, they were partners, connected by Sarah's memory, and united in a purpose neither of them had anticipated when they'd met at the shelter just hours ago. "Welcome home, partner," Harlan said softly, reaching over to scratch behind Keel's ears. The dog leaned into his touch, and in that moment their bond was cemented, not just by shared loss, but by the promise of justice and truth that lay ahead of them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as Harlan walked Keel through their neighborhood. It had been 3 days since the adoption, and while the dog was settling in well at home, his peculiar reactions during their walks were becoming impossible to ignore. Keel trotted beside Harlan, his paws making soft clicking sounds against the concrete. Everything seemed peaceful until they approached the corner of Maple and 5th Street. There, an abandoned Victorian house loomed behind a rusted iron fence. The moment they drew near, Keel's demeanor shifted dramatically. His ears pinned back, and his body went rigid with tension. "Easy there, boy," Harlan murmured, but Keel was fixated on the building. The dog's nose worked frantically, sampling the air, and then he began that same frenzied barking Harlan had witnessed in the truck. A worn Rhodes Kellerman real estate sign creaked in the breeze, its polished corporate logo a stark contrast to the property's decay. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next week, Harlan noticed a pattern. Keel would react violently near certain properties, all of them owned by Rhodes Kellerman's company. The dog's behavior was so consistent that it couldn't be coincidence. One particularly crisp morning, while Harlan was checking Keel in for his required follow-up at the shelter, Delaney Moore approached them. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held genuine concern. "How's he doing?" she asked softly, kneeling to Keel's level. Unlike with most people, the dog immediately relaxed in her presence. "Good at home?" Harlan replied, watching as she gently examined Keel's scarred foreleg. "But there's something odd happening during our walks." Delaney looked up, interest flickering across her freckled face. "What kind of odd?" Harlan described the repeated incidents, the specific properties, and Keel's intense reactions. As he spoke, Delaney's expression grew increasingly thoughtful. "You know," she said, standing up and brushing off her knees, "I've worked with trauma cases before. Sometimes dogs develop specific triggers based on past experiences. Would you be willing to let me help you test something?" That afternoon, Delaney met them after her shift. She carried a backpack filled with various construction materials and chemicals, all carefully sealed in airtight containers. They chose a quiet corner of the shelter's training yard for their experiment. "The key is to be systematic," Delaney explained, laying out the samples. "We'll present each item individually and document his reactions." They worked methodically through common building materials, wood preservatives, paint thinners, various adhesives. Keel remained calm until Delaney opened a container of roofing sealant. The change was immediate and dramatic. The dog backed away, hackles raised, emitting the same aggressive barking they'd witnessed near the abandoned houses. "Wait," Delaney said, checking the label more closely. Her face paled slightly. "This particular sealant was banned 2 years ago due to toxic compounds. It's not supposed to be in use anymore, but—" She trailed off, glancing at Harlan meaningfully. Harlan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. His wife had been a county building inspector, and her last voicemail mentioned investigating unsafe practices. Now here was Keel, the very dog she'd once rescued, reacting strongly to an illegal material. They tested the sealant again, mixing it among other samples. Every single time, Keel identified it without fail. His reaction wasn't random. It was a learned response to something that had hurt him in the past. "The properties where Keel reacts," Delaney said slowly, "they're all owned by Rhodes Kellerman?" Harlan nodded, remembering the gleaming signs in front of each decrepit building. Rhodes Kellerman was a prominent figure in their community, known for buying distressed properties and flipping them for massive profits. His company's advertisements were everywhere, featuring his silver-haired smile and promises of luxury renovations. "I think," Delaney continued carefully, "Keel might be telling us something important, something dangerous." She reached down to stroke the dog's head, who had calmed once the sealant was sealed away. "Dogs don't lie, and they don't forget. If he's reacting this strongly to a banned substance, and it's consistently present at Kellerman's properties, then someone's still using it." Harlan finished, his voice quiet but firm. "Using it where they think nobody will notice." They spent the next few hours documenting everything: the specific properties, Keel's reactions, the exact type of banned sealant. Delaney took careful notes and even recorded videos of Keel's responses to different samples. "This isn't just about protecting Keel anymore," she said as they packed up their materials. "This is about protecting people. That sealant was banned because it causes severe respiratory problems if it's being used in residential renovations." Harlan watched Keel, who sat alert and steady beside them. The dog's intelligent eyes seemed to hold secrets that were only now coming to light. What had started as a simple desire to give a troubled dog a home had evolved into something far more significant. "We need to be careful," Delaney warned, shouldering her backpack. "Rhodes Kellerman has a lot of influence in this town. If he's cutting corners with banned materials, there's no telling what else he might be willing to do to protect his interests." Harlan nodded, thinking of his wife's last investigation and the fire that took her life. The pieces were starting to form a pattern he couldn't ignore. Keel wasn't just a dog with behavioral issues. He was a witness, trying to tell them something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. As they left the training yard, Keel walked confidently between them, his earlier distress forgotten. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but Harlan barely noticed the beauty. His mind was focused on the truth they'd uncovered and the responsibility that came with it. The banned roofing sealant was just the beginning. Through Keel's reactions, they had stumbled upon a dangerous secret hidden in plain sight, woven into the fabric of their community through abandoned houses and luxury renovations. The question now was what to do with this knowledge, and how to protect themselves while bringing the truth to light. Delaney touched his arm gently as they reached their vehicles. "We'll figure this out," she promised, her voice steady and reassuring. "Together." Harlan watched her drive away, then looked down at Keel, who gazed back with unwavering trust. The dog who everyone had written off as dangerous was proving to be something else entirely, a key to uncovering a truth that needed to be told, no matter the cost. As they walked to his truck, Harlan felt the weight of their discovery settling on his shoulders. But alongside that weight was a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since losing his wife. Keel's odd behavior had led them to something important, something that couldn't be ignored. The dog everyone had given up on was about to help them expose a truth that could affect the entire community. With their evidence carefully documented, Harlan knew they needed someone official to validate their findings. He remembered Troy Benning, a firefighter who had worked closely with his wife on several inspections before her death. Troy had always struck him as honest and thorough, exactly the kind of person they needed now. The fire station was quiet when Harlan pulled into the parking lot, Keel sitting alertly in the passenger seat. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the red brick building. Inside, they found Troy cleaning equipment, his broad shoulders hunched over a pile of gear. "Mr. Pike," Troy said, straightening up when he saw them. His eyes flickered to Keel, then back to Harlan. "Been a while. Need your expertise, if you've got a minute," Harlan said quietly. They sat in the break room, where Harlan laid out everything they'd discovered. The banned sealant, Keel's reactions, the connection to Kellerman's properties. Troy's expression grew increasingly troubled as he listened. "Funny you should mention that sealant," Troy said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced around the empty room before continuing. "I've cited it in at least 6 inspection reports over the past year. Every single time, the reports came back altered. References to the sealant, gone, like they never existed." Harlan felt his stomach tighten. "Altered by whom?" "Can't prove anything," Troy said, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "But the changes always happen after the reports go through the city planning office." "And guess who sits on the planning commission?" "Kellerman," Harlan said flatly. Troy nodded. "Man's got his fingers in everything. Construction permits, zoning variances, safety inspections. Nothing happens in this town without his knowledge. And when something might hurt his interests." He trailed off meaningfully. Keel, who had been lying quietly at Harlan's feet, suddenly lifted his head and growled softly. Through the window, they could see a delivery truck pulling up to the station, carrying the same brand of supplies they'd found at Kellerman's sites. "Your dog's got good instincts," Troy observed. "Better than some people around here." Harlan scratched behind Keel's ears, calming him. "We've got proof now. Documentation, videos, multiple witnesses. They can't just make that disappear." Troy's expression was grim. "Don't be so sure." "Your wife?" He hesitated. She was getting close to something big before the warehouse fire. Something about systematic code violations and falsified permits. All her files went missing after. The implications hung heavy in the air. Harlan felt a chill despite the warm room. "We need to take this to someone who can't be bought off." "Be careful," Troy warned. "Start with animal control, maybe. Document everything through official channels. Make it harder for them to sweep under the rug." Following Troy's advice, Harlan scheduled a meeting with Prudence Vale the next morning. He brought everything: their documentation, videos, even Troy's statement about the altered reports. Keel came too, calm and dignified despite the disapproving looks from the shelter staff. Director Vale sat behind her desk, her thin smile never reaching her eyes as she reviewed their evidence. The office felt uncomfortably small, with its stark fluorescent lighting and walls lined with certificates and awards. "Mr. Pike," she said finally, setting aside the folder without really looking at it. "While I appreciate your enthusiasm, I'm afraid this is all rather circumstantial. A dog barking at certain properties hardly constitutes evidence of wrongdoing." "It's more than just barking," Harlan insisted. "We have documented proof of banned materials being used, a firefighter's testimony about altered reports. This goes beyond just Keel." "Ah, yes, about the dog." Vale's smile thinned further. "I've been reviewing his file. Given his history of aggressive behavior and these new incidents you're reporting, approaching buildings, reacting to workers, I'm concerned he may pose a public safety risk." Harlan felt his chest tighten. He's not aggressive. He's identifying dangerous materials that could hurt people. He's a rescue dog with a history of biting. Vale countered smoothly. "And now you're encouraging him to approach construction sites and workers. I'm afraid I'll have to list him as dangerous under County Ordinance 47.6. "This isn't about Keel," Harlan said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "This is about illegal practices that are putting people at risk. The same practices my wife was investigating before she died." Vale's expression hardened. "Mr. Pike, I understand you're still grieving, but trying to create conspiracy theories won't bring your wife back. I suggest you focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past." She stood, signaling the meeting was over. "And I strongly recommend you surrender the dog before he hurts someone. We wouldn't want any unfortunate incidents." The threat was clear in her words. As Harlan left the office, Keel pressed close to his leg. He finally understood what they were up against. This wasn't just about one developer cutting corners or one bureaucrat looking the other way. This was systemic, a network of powerful people protecting their interests at any cost. He thought about his wife, about her final voicemail mentioning the chemical smell, about Troy's altered reports and Vale's thinly veiled threats, about how easily evidence could disappear and truth could be buried when enough money and influence were involved. In the parking lot, Harlan knelt beside Keel, who looked at him with complete trust. "They're scared of you, boy," he murmured, scratching the dog's ears. "Not because you're dangerous, but because you can expose their secrets. But we're not going to let them win." Keel's tail wagged slightly, and he pressed his head against Harlan's hand. Together, they had uncovered a truth that powerful forces wanted to keep hidden. The opposition was clear now, and they would need every bit of courage and determination to stand against it. The sun was setting as they drove home, casting long shadows across the town. Harlan's mind raced with everything they'd learned. Vale's dismissal of their evidence and her move to label Keel as dangerous were just the beginning. They would need to be careful, document everything, and find allies they could trust. Troy's warnings echoed in his head. His wife had been close to exposing something big before she died. Now, with Keel's help, Harlan was starting to understand just how deep the corruption ran. Kellerman's influence touched everything, from building permits to safety inspections to animal control policies. But understanding the system that protected Kellerman wasn't enough. They would need to find a way to break through it, to make the truth impossible to ignore, and they would need to do it while keeping Keel safe from those who wanted to silence him. As they pulled into his driveway, Harlan looked at Keel, who sat alert and watchful beside him. The dog everyone had written off as dangerous was actually their best hope for exposing the truth. Together, they had stumbled onto something bigger than either of them, a web of corruption that had already claimed one life and wouldn't hesitate to claim more. The challenge ahead was daunting, but Harlan felt a fierce determination growing inside him. They had truth on their side, and sometimes that was the most dangerous weapon of all. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm at Harlan's repair shop. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed softly as he worked late, trying to catch up on a backlog of small engine repairs. Keel lay curled up on his worn bed in the corner, occasionally lifting his head to watch Harlan's movements with alert eyes. The familiar scents of oil and metal surrounded them, creating a peaceful atmosphere that had become their normal routine. Delaney had stopped by after her shift at the shelter, bringing coffee and her quiet determination to help piece together what they'd learned about Kellerman's properties. She sat cross-legged on an old office chair, spreading out papers on Harlan's workbench. "Look at this pattern," she said, pointing to a map she'd marked with red dots. Every single building where Keel had a reaction, they're all Kellerman properties that were renovated right before resale. Harlan wiped his hands on a shop rag and leaned over to study the pattern. "And each one sold for way more than market value," he added, his voice heavy with the weight of understanding. Suddenly, Keel's head snapped up. His ears pricked forward and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Both Harlan and Delaney froze, having learned to trust the dog's instincts. "What is it, boy?" Harlan asked softly, moving toward Keel. The dog's growl intensified, and he sprang to his feet, hackles raised. That's when Harlan caught it, a faint whiff of something chemical, something that shouldn't be there. His heart stopped as recognition hit him. It was the same scent that had been on his wife's clothes the night of the warehouse fire. "Delaney, get out! Now!" His voice was calm but urgent. "Take the back door. Something's wrong." She didn't question him, quickly gathering the papers into her arms. But before they could move, there was a sharp crack from somewhere in the front of the building, followed by an orange glow that grew with frightening speed. The fire spread with unnatural quickness, eating up the walls as if they were made of paper. Smoke began to fill the air, thick and acrid, burning their throats. Keel barked sharply, pushing against Harlan's legs, herding them toward the back of the shop. "The chemical accelerant." Harlan coughed out, grabbing Delaney's arm. "They're using the same stuff. They're trying to destroy the evidence." They stumbled toward the back exit, but a thunderous crash shook the building. A support beam had given way, bringing down part of the ceiling near the door. Sparks and burning debris rained down around them. Keel darted forward, weaving through the smoke with purpose. He stopped at a narrow gap between the fallen debris and the wall, barking urgently. Harlan pushed Delaney toward it first. "Go!" he shouted over the roar of the flames. "Follow Keel!" Delaney hesitated for a split second, her eyes wide with fear. Not for herself, but for him. "Harlan, I'm right behind you," he promised, helping her through the gap. The heat was becoming unbearable, the smoke so thick it was hard to see. Harlan could hear the building groaning around them, more beams threatening to give way. He dropped to his hands and knees, crawling after Delaney as Keel led them through the maze of fallen debris. Another crash behind them spurred them forward. Harlan could feel the skin on his back, blistering from the heat, but he kept moving. Keel's figure was barely visible through the smoke, but his barking provided a lifeline to follow. They were almost to the door when another beam crashed down, missing Harlan by inches. The impact sent him sprawling, and for a moment he couldn't tell which way was out. The smoke was everywhere, burning his eyes, filling his lungs. Then he felt teeth grip his sleeve, Keel pulling him up, guiding him forward. The dog's strength and determination cut through Harlan's disorientation. Together, they stumbled the last few feet to freedom. The cool night air hit them like a blessing as they burst out of the burning building. They didn't stop running until they reached the far end of the parking lot, where Delaney was already calling 911 on her phone. Harlan collapsed onto the pavement, pulling Keel close as they watched his livelihood go up in flames. The dog pressed against him, trembling but vigilant, still watching for danger. Delaney knelt beside them, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaking as she checked them both for injuries. Harlan nodded, unable to speak for a moment as he caught his breath. His throat felt raw from the smoke, and his back was burning. But they were alive. All three of them were alive. As sirens wailed in the distance, Harlan looked at the inferno that had once been his shop. The fire had claimed nearly everything he owned, but watching Delaney check Keel for injuries, seeing the dog's unwavering loyalty even now, he knew what mattered most had survived. This isn't just about covering up building code violations anymore, Delaney said softly, her hand finding Harlan's in the darkness. They tried to kill us. Harlan squeezed her hand, feeling a steel resolve settle into his bones. His wife had died investigating Kellerman's corruption, and now the man had tried to silence them the same way. But this time, there was a witness. A dog who could identify the chemical accelerant, who carried the evidence in his very reactions. "We're not running," Harlan said, his voice rough but determined. "We're going to fight. For Sarah, for Keel, for everyone else they've hurt." Keel sat up straighter, as if understanding the weight of the moment. His eyes reflected the flames, but showed no fear, only the same steady determination Harlan felt growing in his heart. Fire trucks began arriving, their lights casting red and white flashes across the scene. Harlan knew this was just the beginning. Kellerman had shown his hand, revealed just how far he would go to protect his secrets. But in doing so, he'd also shown his fear. He was afraid of what they knew, afraid of what they could prove. As paramedics approached to check them for injuries, Harlan held on to that knowledge. They had survived, and they had each other. Delaney's quiet strength, Keel's unwavering loyalty, and his own newfound resolve, together they were stronger than Kellerman's threats. The fire had taken his shop, but it had given him something in return. Absolute certainty. There was no more doubt about what they were dealing with, no more question about whether they should pursue the truth. Kellerman had made it personal, just as he had the night Sarah died. This time, though, Harlan wasn't alone. He looked at Delaney, who met his gaze with fierce determination, despite her trembling hands. He felt Keel's solid presence against his leg, the dog's body tense and alert, ready to protect them both. As firefighters battled the blaze, Harlan watched his past burn away. But from those ashes, something new was rising, a purpose, a mission, a fight he now knew he had to win. Not just for survival, but for justice. The night air was thick with smoke and sirens, but Harlan's mind was clear. They would need help, would need to be smarter and more careful than ever. But they wouldn't back down. Kellerman had tried to silence them with fire, just as he had silenced others before. Instead, he'd only succeeded in forging their resolve in those same flames. Paramedics wrapped blankets around their shoulders and insisted on checking them for smoke inhalation. Harlan submitted to their care while keeping Keel close, knowing the dog's presence would be crucial in the days to come. They had evidence now, not just papers and patterns, but the visceral proof of how far Kellerman would go to keep his secrets. As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what they'd lost started to sink in. Years of work, tools collected over a lifetime, customer projects that could never be replaced, all gone. But looking at Delaney and Keel, seeing their unwavering support even in this darkest moment, Harlan knew he'd gained something far more valuable. Allies in a fight that had claimed too many victims already. The fire continued to rage, but its threat had transformed into something else, a beacon lighting the way forward. They had survived Kellerman's attempt to silence them, and in doing so had found their strength. Now it was time to use it. The morning after the fire, Harlan sat cross-legged on his living room floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes he hadn't touched since Sarah's death. The smell of smoke still clung to his clothes from last night's attack, but he couldn't rest. Something about Keel's behavior, the way the dog reacted to specific chemical smells, kept nagging at his mind. "There has to be more," he muttered, reaching for another box labeled Sarah's office. Keel lay nearby, watching with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand more than any dog should. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the box. Inside were stacks of his wife's notebooks, building inspection reports, and sketches. Sarah had always drawn while thinking, filling margins with doodles and creating detailed diagrams of problem areas she discovered during inspections. "I never could bring myself to look through these before, boy," Harlan said softly to Keel, who inched closer, resting his head on Harlan's knee. The gesture gave him strength to continue. As he carefully sorted through the papers, a loose sketch fluttered to the floor. Keel's ears perked up immediately. The paper was different from Sarah's usual inspection notes. This was done on heavier stock, more carefully preserved. Harlan picked it up, and his breath caught in his throat. It was a detailed drawing of a puppy, a brindled coat, lean frame, and a distinctive scar along the foreleg. Below the sketch, in Sarah's neat handwriting, was a single word. Witness. "Oh my God," Harlan whispered, his hands shaking more violently now. He looked at Keel, really looked at him, seeing the same markings, the same scar. "It was you." "You were there." Keel whined softly, pressing closer to Harlan's side. The pieces started falling into place with devastating clarity. Sarah had found Keel at one of Kellerman's construction sites. Not just found him, but recognized him as evidence of something sinister. Harlan began pulling out more papers with renewed urgency. There were more sketches, more notes. One page detailed locations where Sarah had documented strange chemical odors. Another had a list of dates and times, with small paw prints drawn in the margins. "She was training you," Harlan realized, his voice thick with emotion. "She wasn't just protecting you. She was teaching you to identify the accelerants. You weren't just a rescue, you were her evidence." The dog's reaction to certain chemical smells wasn't random aggression. It was learned behavior, taught by Sarah as she built her case against Kellerman. Every time Keel had reacted strongly to workers or specific buildings, he had been identifying the same substances that had traumatized him as a puppy. Harlan found a small notebook, its pages wrinkled as if it had been wet and dried. Inside, Sarah's handwriting grew increasingly urgent. "Keel alerts consistently to same chemical signature. Cross-referenced with samples from previous fire sites. Need to document pattern. K's properties all show same traces. Dog's trauma response equals reliable indicator." His heart pounded as he read further. Sarah had been methodically building a case, using Keel's remarkable scent memory as part of her evidence. The dog wasn't aggressive. He was triggered by specific chemical traces that reminded him of trauma he'd experienced at arson sites. "That's why you were at the shelter," Harlan said softly, running a gentle hand over Keel's scarred leg. "Sarah had to hide you somewhere safe while she gathered more evidence. But then the warehouse fire happened, and you were left there, labeled as dangerous because nobody understood what you were really trying to tell them." Keel looked up at him with those knowing eyes, and Harlan felt tears spring to his own. His wife had died trying to expose Kellerman's crimes, but she'd left behind a living witness, a dog whose very reactions were proof of the developer's arson scheme. The implications staggered him. Every time Keel had reacted badly to someone, every instance of supposed aggression at the shelter, it hadn't been random violence. The dog had been trying to warn people about the dangerous chemicals he'd been trained to identify. Harlan found more pages, these containing careful documentation of building materials and chemical compositions. Sarah had been thorough, methodical in her investigation. She'd created a record of evidence that went far beyond typical building code violations, evidence that pointed to a systematic pattern of arson for profit. "She knew," Harlan whispered, papers trembling in his hands. "She knew what Kellerman was doing, and she was building a case that would be impossible to ignore. That's why." He couldn't finish the sentence, the reality of why his wife had died hitting him with fresh pain. Keel pressed against him more firmly, offering comfort even as Harlan's discovery confirmed the trauma the dog had endured. The pieces fit together with horrible clarity. The accelerants used in Kellerman's arson schemes had left their mark on Keel, both physically and psychologically. Rather than let that trauma break him, Sarah had channeled it into evidence. Harlan spread the papers out on the floor, creating a timeline. Sarah had found Keel at one of Kellerman's construction sites, recognized signs of chemical accelerant use, and realized the puppy's strong reactions could help prove a pattern of arson. She'd worked with the dog in secret, documenting his responses, building a case that would stand up in court. But Kellerman had discovered what she was doing. The warehouse fire hadn't been random. It had been meant to destroy both the evidence and the investigator who had gathered it. What the arsonist hadn't counted on was Sarah's foresight in hiding her key witness at the shelter, labeled as unadoptable to keep him safe. "You're not hateful," Harlan said firmly, cupping Keel's face in his hands. "You're not dangerous or bad. You're a survivor, and you're the evidence Sarah died protecting. All this time, you've been trying to finish her work, trying to warn people about the chemicals you were trained to identify." The dog's tail wagged slightly, as if relieved to be finally understood. Harlan felt a fierce surge of protective love, mixed with renewed determination. Sarah had died trying to expose Kellerman's crimes, but she'd left behind everything they needed to finish what she started, including a living witness whose evidence would be impossible to dismiss. Harlan carefully gathered the papers, his hands steady now with purpose. The attempt on their lives at the shop had shown how desperate Kellerman was to keep his secrets. But Sarah had outmaneuvered him, leaving behind a trail of evidence and a unique witness who could tie it all together. "We're going to finish this," Harlan promised, both to Keel and to Sarah's memory. "We're going to show everyone exactly what you are, not a dangerous dog, but a brave survivor who holds the key to exposing years of crimes. We'll make them understand what Sarah saw in you, what she died protecting." Keel sat up straighter, as if accepting his role in the mission ahead. He wasn't just a rescue dog anymore, he was living evidence, a witness whose very reactions could help bring down a criminal enterprise. Sarah had known it, had died protecting this truth, and now it was up to Harlan to help Keel finally tell his story. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the scattered papers that documented Sarah's investigation. Harlan began carefully organizing them, knowing each piece was crucial to understanding the full scope of what they were dealing with. His wife had left them a roadmap. Now they just had to be brave enough to follow it to its conclusion. The morning sun cast long shadows across Harlan Pike's driveway as he carefully loaded equipment into the bed of his weathered pickup truck. His hands, calloused from years of mechanical work, moved with deliberate purpose as he checked each item off his mental list. Beside him, Keel watched attentively, his brindled coat catching the early light. "Looks like we've got everything," Harlan muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He glanced at his watch. 6:30 in the morning. The demolition crew wouldn't arrive at the old Maple Street warehouse for another 2 hours. The sound of tires on gravel announced Delaney Moore's arrival in her compact car, followed moments later by Troy Benning's SUV. The firefighter stepped out, already dressed in his off-duty clothes, jeans and a plain black t-shirt that helped him blend in rather than stand out. "Morning," Delaney called softly, her auburn hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She carried a laptop bag and what looked like recording equipment. "Did you get those sensors working, Harlan?" Harlan nodded, reaching into the truck to pull out what looked like modified carbon monoxide detectors. "Calibrated them myself last night. They'll pick up any airflow changes and chemical signatures in the basement void. Even rigged them with wireless transmission so we can monitor from outside." "Smart thinking," Benning commented, examining one of the devices. "And these cameras?" "High definition, motion-activated, and waterproof." Harlan explained, showing them the small black units he'd modified from security cameras. "Got them at cost from my supplier. They'll catch everything, both video and audio." Delaney smiled, clearly impressed by Harlan's ingenuity. "Who knew having a mechanic on our team would be so helpful?" "Years of jerry-rigging broken equipment teaches you a few things," Harlan replied modestly. He checked his watch again. "We should head out. Need to get everything set up before the demo crew arrives." They drove separately to avoid drawing attention, with Keel riding shotgun in Harlan's truck. The dog sat alert, his intelligent eyes scanning the road ahead. Harlan couldn't help but notice how different Keel seemed now, still cautious but purposeful rather than fearful. The old Maple Street warehouse loomed ahead, its brick facade weathered by decades of neglect. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the morning breeze, and a chain-link fence surrounded the property. Benning used his firefighter credentials to get them access, explaining they were conducting a final safety inspection. "We've got about an hour," Benning said quietly as they gathered their equipment. "I'll keep watch while you two set up. Remember, the basement access is through the southeast corner." Harlan nodded, shouldering his tool bag. "Delaney, you've got the coordinates marked for each sensor." "All mapped out," she confirmed, showing him the layout on her tablet. "We'll place them at 5-foot intervals along the north wall where the void space is largest." Working efficiently, they made their way into the musty basement. Keel followed closely, his nose working constantly. Harlan noticed how the dog's behavior changed as they approached certain areas, his hackles rising slightly, his movements becoming more deliberate. "He's already picking up something," Delaney whispered, making notes on her tablet. "Look at his body language." Harlan began mounting the sensors, using his mechanical expertise to ensure they were perfectly positioned to catch any air currents. The cameras went up next, carefully hidden, but with clear sight lines to the key areas. "Testing transmission," Delaney murmured, checking her laptop. "All sensors online, cameras streaming clearly. We're good to go." They worked their way back upstairs just as the first demolition vehicles began arriving. Benning met them at their predetermined observation point, a vacant office building across the street with a clear view of the warehouse. "Right on schedule," Benning commented, watching through binoculars as the crew began their preparations. "That's Kellerman's personal demolition team. I recognize the foreman, Mike Travers. He's been involved in at least 3 suspicious fires I've investigated." They watched as the crew moved through their pre-demolition checklist. Keel sat alertly between Harlan and Delaney, his eyes fixed on the warehouse. When 2 workers emerged from the basement, the dog's reaction was immediate. A low growl, his muscles tensing. "Got movement on camera 3, Delaney reported, her eyes on the laptop screen. "They're placing something in the void space. Wait, did you see that?" The camera had caught clear footage of the workers placing containers in the basement. More importantly, it recorded their conversation. "Boss wants this one to go clean and quick," one worker said. "No traces, just like always." "Yeah, well, make sure that accelerant is placed right this time," the other replied. "Don't want another mess like the Pike woman found." Harlan's hands clenched into fists at the casual mention of his wife, but he forced himself to stay focused. Beside him, Keel's growl deepened. "Sensor readings are spiking," Delaney reported, her voice tight with excitement. Chemical signatures matching the same accelerant Keel's been alerting to at other sites. The morning wore on as they documented everything. The workers made 3 more trips to the basement, each time carrying suspicious materials. Keel's reactions remained consistent, providing a living confirmation of what the sensors were detecting. The crucial moment came when Travers, the foreman, made a phone call from what he thought was a private corner of the site. The camera's sensitive microphone picked up every word. "Yeah, Mr. Kellerman, everything's set just like you specified. Same stuff as always, untraceable once it burns. No problems. We'll have this place down and clear before anyone asks questions." "Got it," Delaney whispered triumphantly, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she backed up the recordings. "We've got it all. The accelerant placement, the conversations, the phone call, everything." Benning nodded grimly. "This is exactly what we needed." Chemical signatures, clear footage, recorded conversations explicitly linking it to Kellerman. And Keel's reactions prove this isn't an isolated incident, it's their standard operating procedure. Harlan reached down to scratch behind Keel's ears, feeling a surge of pride and vindication. The dog looked up at him with those intelligent eyes, and Harlan could swear he saw understanding there. This wasn't just about exposing Kellerman anymore. It was about justice for everyone who'd been hurt by his schemes, including Sarah. "We should pack up and get out of here," Benning advised, keeping watch through the binoculars. "They'll be starting the actual demolition soon, and we've got everything we need." They carefully gathered their equipment, Delaney making multiple backups of all the data they'd collected. As they loaded everything into their vehicles, Harlan felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time since Sarah's death, they had real, concrete proof of what had been happening. "What's our next move?" Delaney asked as they prepared to leave, her eyes bright with purpose. "We take this to people who can't ignore it," Benning replied. "I've got contacts in the state fire marshal's office who've been suspicious of Kellerman for years. With this kind of evidence, they'll have to act." Harlan looked down at Keel, who sat alertly at his side. "You did good, boy," he said softly. "Sarah would be proud of you. Of all of us." They drove away separately, leaving the warehouse behind just as the demolition crew began their final preparations. In Harlan's truck, Keel sat tall in the passenger seat, no longer the feared and hated dog from the shelter, but a key player in exposing a dangerous conspiracy. The evidence they'd gathered today would change everything. Harlan could feel it in his bones. The morning's success filled him with a quiet determination. They'd proven what his wife had suspected, what Keel had been trying to tell them all along. Now it was time to make sure justice was served, not just for Sarah, but for every person and property that had fallen victim to Kellerman's schemes. The morning after their successful recording of Kellerman's scheme, Harlan sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold. Keel rested his head on Harlan's knee, offering silent comfort. The local news played quietly on the small TV in the corner, but Harlan barely heard it. His mind was racing with plans for their next steps. The sharp knock at the door made both man and dog jump. Keel's hackles rose as 2 police officers and Prudence Vale stood on the front step, flanked by animal control officers in their familiar tan uniforms. "Mr. Pike." Vale's thin smile didn't reach her eyes. "We have a court order regarding the dangerous animal in your possession." Harlan's heart pounded as he read the official document thrust into his hands. The legal language swam before his eyes, but certain phrases jumped out. Immediate surrender, multiple documented incidents, euthanasia order. "This is ridiculous," Harlan's voice cracked. "We have proof that Keel isn't dangerous. He's helping expose criminal activity. Your accusations against Mr. Kellerman have been thoroughly investigated and dismissed," Vale said smoothly. "His legal team has provided extensive documentation proving all operations are fully compliant with regulations. Meanwhile, your dog has a documented history of aggressive behavior." One of the police officers stepped forward. "Sir, please step aside. We're authorized to take the animal by force, if necessary." Harlan felt the walls closing in. He'd known Kellerman had influence, but this level of corruption struck him like a physical blow. "Let me call my lawyer," he pleaded. "The order is effective immediately," Vale stated coldly. "Any delay could result in your arrest for obstruction." Keel pressed against Harlan's leg, trembling. The dog who had faced down arsonists and survived a burning building now looked small and vulnerable. Harlan's mind raced, searching for options, but found none. The animal control officers moved in with their catchpoles. Harlan wanted to fight, to grab Keel and run, but the police officers' hands resting on their weapons made it clear that wasn't an option. His legs felt like lead as he was forced to step back. "It's okay, boy," Harlan whispered, his voice breaking as the loops descended toward Keel's neck. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Tears blurred his vision as Keel looked up at him with complete trust, not understanding why his person wasn't protecting him. The catchpoles snapped tight. Keel yelped, more in surprise than pain, but the sound tore through Harlan's heart like a knife. The dog struggled briefly, then went still, tail tucked and ears flat against his head. "You're making a terrible mistake," Harlan said hoarsely as they dragged Keel toward the door. "He's innocent. He's the key to proving everything." "The matter is closed, Mr. Pike," Vale said. "I suggest you focus on finding a more suitable pet, one without a violent history." Harlan followed them out to the animal control van, each step feeling like he was walking through deep mud. Keel's nails scraped against the pavement as he tried to dig in, to resist being loaded into the cage in the back. Their eyes met one final time before the doors slammed shut. The van pulled away, carrying with it not just Harlan's dog, but the living connection to his wife's final case. The proof they needed. The friend who had helped him find purpose again after losing everything. Harlan stood in his driveway long after the vehicles disappeared, the court order crumpled in his fist. The morning sun felt cold on his face. For the first time since starting this fight, he felt truly beaten. The corruption ran deeper than he'd imagined, reaching into every system that should have protected the innocent. Inside his empty house, Harlan sank onto the couch where Keel usually curled up next to him. The dog's favorite toy, a rope bone they used for training, lay abandoned on the floor. His wife's sketch of Keel's paw print sat on the coffee table, a bitter reminder of all they'd lost. The silence pressed in around him. No clicking of nails on the hardwood, no soft breathing from the dog bed in the corner, no warm presence leaning against his leg. The emptiness felt suffocating. His phone buzzed, Delaney calling. He couldn't bring himself to answer. What could he say? He'd failed. Failed to protect Keel, failed to expose the truth, failed to honor his wife's final investigation. The weight of it all pressed down on his chest until he could barely breathe. The clock on the wall ticked away the precious minutes. Somewhere across town, Keel sat in a cold kennel, probably wondering why Harlan had abandoned him. The thought of what would happen next made his stomach turn. Harlan had always considered himself a fighter. When his wife died, he'd fought through the grief. When his shop burned, he'd fought to keep going. But this, watching helplessly as they took Keel away, this felt like a knockout blow. The system was too big, too corrupt, too powerful. He picked up his wife's sketch, tracing the lines with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to her or to Keel. "I tried. I really tried." Outside, clouds gathered, darkening the morning sky, a fitting backdrop for the darkest moment Harlan had faced since losing his wife. He'd thought rock bottom was watching his shop burn, but this helpless knowledge that Keel was alone and scared, counting down his final hours, this was an entirely new depth of despair. The court order lay on the coffee table, its official letterhead and legal stamps marking it as the weapon that had finally defeated them. Harlan stared at it, remembering Keel's confused eyes as he was dragged away. The dog had trusted him completely, and he'd been powerless to help. Now both his wife's legacy and the loyal pup who had helped him find purpose again were slipping away. The corrupt system had won, burying the truth along with its witnesses. In a matter of hours, Keel would be gone, and with him, any chance of exposing Kellerman's crimes. Rain began to patter against the windows, matching Harlan's mood. He sat in his empty house, surrounded by reminders of everything he'd lost, feeling more alone than he had since the day his wife died. The darkness pressed in, threatening to swallow what little hope remained. The evening sky cast long shadows across the abandoned Riverside Hotel as Harlan's phone buzzed with an urgent text from Delaney. His heart raced as he read her message. "Kellerman's crew moving tonight. Hotel demolition cover for burn. Be careful." Harlan's hands trembled slightly as he dialed Troy Benning. The firefighter answered on the first ring. "Got Delaney's tip too." Benning said without preamble. "I'm 10 minutes out. Park behind the old laundromat. Less visible there." The condemned hotel loomed ahead, its broken windows like dark, empty eyes watching their approach. Harlan pulled his truck into the shadowy lot behind the laundromat, Keel sitting alertly in the passenger seat. The dog's ears were perked forward, his nose already working overtime. "Stay here, boy," Harlan whispered, giving Keel's head a gentle pat. "Just until we make sure it's safe." The dog whined softly but remained in place as ordered. Benning's dark SUV rolled up moments later. The firefighter emerged carrying a duffel bag, his movements quick but controlled. "Got the tracking devices," he said in a low voice. "Small but powerful. They'll record temperature spikes and chemical signatures. Perfect evidence if we can plant them before they start." They moved swiftly through the growing darkness toward the hotel's service entrance. Benning produced a small flashlight, keeping the beam low and checking corners as they advanced. The musty smell of abandonment filled the air. Old carpet, moisture damage, decay. But underneath it all, Harlan caught another scent that made his blood run cold. Chemicals. "They've already been here?" he whispered, laid the groundwork. Benning nodded grimly. "Standard procedure for them. Set up early, come back after dark for the ignition. We've got maybe an hour tops." They worked methodically through the first floor, planting trackers in strategic locations, near support beams, in corners where accelerant trails would likely lead, beside electrical panels that could provide convenient cover stories. The beam of Benning's flashlight caught cobwebs and peeling wallpaper, casting strange shadows that made every sound seem magnified. "Second floor next," Benning murmured. "That's usually where they—" A distant metal clang cut him off. Both men froze, listening intently. Footsteps echoed from somewhere above, followed by low voices. "They're early," Harlan breathed. "We need to—" The sharp crack of a door being kicked open upstairs made them both jump. More voices now, growing closer. The acrid smell of chemicals grew stronger. "Split up," Benning hissed. "Plant the rest fast. Meet at the south exit in 5 minutes." Harlan grabbed several trackers and moved quickly toward the east wing while Benning took the west. His heart pounded as he worked, fingers fumbling slightly with each device as he secured them in place. The voices above grew louder, accompanied by the sound of liquid being poured. A sudden crash from the floor above made him stumble. Smoke! He could smell smoke now. They'd started already, moving faster than expected. Harlan turned toward the south exit, but flames were already licking up the walls, spreading with unnatural speed along chemical trails. He changed direction, heading for the service stairs, but thick smoke was rolling down the hallway. The heat was intense, making it hard to breathe. He pulled his shirt over his nose and mouth, trying to stay low as he searched for another way out. The main entrance, it was his only chance now. Harlan fought his way through the smoke-filled corridor, using the wall to guide himself. His eyes burned, tears streaming down his face as he struggled to see. Finally, his hand found the double doors, but they wouldn't budge. Chains? They'd chained the doors shut from the outside. Panic clawed at his chest as he spun around, searching desperately for another option. The smoke was getting thicker, the heat more intense. He could hear the building groaning around him as fire ate through its bones. A familiar bark cut through the chaos. "Keel!" The dog must have broken free from the truck. Harlan tried to call out but doubled over coughing instead. The smoke was overwhelming now, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Another bark, closer this time, followed by urgent scratching sounds. Harlan stumbled toward the noise, finding himself at a maintenance door he hadn't noticed before. Keel's muffled barking continued from the other side. With trembling hands, Harlan fought with the door handle. It was stuck, warped by heat, but finally gave way with a screech of protesting metal. Keel burst through immediately, grabbing Harlan's sleeve in his teeth and pulling insistently. "Good boy," Harlan gasped, letting the dog guide him. "Show me the way out." Keel led him through a maze of service corridors, the dog's nose unerringly finding paths where the smoke was thinnest. They emerged onto a scaffold clinging to the building's exterior. Not entirely stable, but their only option as flames roared behind them. The metal creaked ominously under their weight. Harlan forced himself to focus on each step, trying not to look down at the ground 4 stories below. Keel moved steadily ahead, pausing occasionally to make sure Harlan was following. A section of scaffold suddenly shifted beneath them, tilting at a sickening angle. Harlan grabbed a support strut, heart in his throat, as pieces of metal and wood rained down. But Keel was there instantly, pressing against his legs, helping him keep his balance until they could scramble to a more stable section. Finally, mercifully, they reached a maintenance ladder on the building's far side. Harlan's arms shook with exhaustion as he climbed down, Keel waiting patiently on each landing until he caught up. When they at last reached solid ground, Harlan collapsed to his knees, pulling Keel into a fierce embrace. "You saved my life," he whispered hoarsely into the dog's fur. You incredible brave boy. Benning appeared from around the corner, face etched with worry. Thank God, he breathed. When I couldn't find you. But you got out, and we got what we needed. The trackers were transmitting right up until the fire reached them. We've got them this time. Harlan nodded, still holding Keel close. The dog's heart beat steadily against his chest, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected heroes came with 4 paws and unwavering loyalty. They had survived, and more importantly, they had proof. Now it was time to make sure justice was served. In the distance, sirens wailed as emergency vehicles approached. The Riverside Hotel continued to burn against the night sky, but its secrets were no longer safe. Thanks to a man, a firefighter, and a dog that everyone had once feared, the truth would finally come to light. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as a fleet of police vehicles pulled up with lights flashing. Officers moved with purpose, armed with evidence folders containing Benning's surveillance footage and the meticulous paper trail Delaney had assembled over months of careful documentation. Inside the marble-floored lobby, Rhodes Kellerman was in the middle of a press conference, his silver hair perfectly styled as he announced plans for his newest development project. His confident smile faltered when Police Chief Martinez strode in, flanked by uniformed officers. "Rhodes Kellerman," Chief Martinez's voice echoed through the lobby. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit arson, insurance fraud, and attempted murder." The gathered reporters gasped, cameras flashing as officers moved to handcuff the developer. Kellerman's practiced charm cracked, revealing naked fury beneath. "This is absurd!" "I demand to speak to my attorney." "We have you on video directing the hotel arson," Martinez stated firmly. "And your friend Director Vale's been singing like a bird since dawn." In an adjacent conference room, Prudence Vale sat stone-faced as investigators laid out years of falsified reports and buried evidence. Her normally pristine county uniform looked rumpled, her severe haircut disheveled. "I was just following orders," she muttered. "Kellerman said he'd ruin me if I didn't play along." Across town at the animal shelter, Delaney watched with tears in her eyes as official paperwork was filed reclassifying Keel from dangerous animal to certified detection dog. The brindled dog sat calmly at Harlan's side, his intelligent eyes taking in the scene. "He was never dangerous," Delaney said softly, kneeling to scratch behind Keel's ears. "He was trying to warn us all along." The shelter's new interim director nodded. "The evidence is overwhelming. Keel's acute sensitivity to accelerants made him a key witness. He'll be an invaluable asset to the fire investigation unit." Harlan's weathered hand rested on Keel's head. "My wife knew," he said quietly. She recognized his potential that first day she found him. Saw past what others missed. Later that afternoon, Harlan stood before his wife's grave, autumn leaves dancing around his feet. The polished granite headstone reflected the warm light as Keel sat beside him, a steady presence. Harlan placed fresh flowers against the stone. "You were right all along, sweetheart," he murmured. "About Kellerman, about the corruption, about this brave dog." His voice grew thick with emotion. "Keel helped us finish what you started. Justice was served because you had the courage to save him that day." The breeze rustled through nearby trees as Harlan wiped his eyes. "I think you'd be proud of how far we've come. How many lives we'll save now that the truth is out." He knelt to wrap an arm around Keel. "Your legacy lives on through him, through the good we'll do together." Soft footsteps approached on the grass, and Harlan turned to see Delaney walking toward them. Her auburn hair caught the sunlight, and her eyes held both sympathy and something deeper, a shared understanding born of their journey together. She stopped beside him, her shoulder brushing his. Without words, her hand found his, fingers intertwining. The simple gesture carried the weight of everything they'd been through, the dangers faced, the truth uncovered, the healing begun. Keel pressed against both their legs, forming a circle of connection. Harlan squeezed Delaney's hand gently, feeling the rough calluses from her shelter work against his mechanic's palms. In that quiet moment, he recognized the gift of new beginnings, a chance to honor the past while embracing hope for the future. "She would have liked you," Harlan said softly to Delaney. "You have the same kind heart, same determination to fight for what's right." Delaney's eyes grew misty as she smiled. "I wish I could have known her. But I see her courage living on, in you, in Keel, in the changes we've helped create." Together they stood in the golden afternoon light, united by love, justice, and the unshakable bond with a remarkable dog who had brought them all together. As they turned to leave, Harlan felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The long journey through grief and darkness had led him here, to truth, to purpose, and to a love he never expected to find again. Keel trotted happily between them as they walked back to the car, his coat gleaming in the sun. No longer the most hated dog, but a hero in his own right, living proof that sometimes the most wounded souls have the most to give, if only someone believes in them enough to see past the scars. Delaney's hand remained warm in Harlan's as they drove away from the cemetery. The future stretched before them. Not perfect, but full of possibility. Together with Keel, they would build something new from the ashes of the past, something beautiful and lasting, forged in courage, justice, and love. The evening news would lead with Kellerman's arrest, detailing the years of corruption finally exposed. Vale's guilty plea would follow, along with celebrations from the families of fire victims who at last had answers. But for Harlan, the real victory was more personal, finding his way back to life and love, guided by a brave dog and a woman who shared his belief in second chances. Back at Harlan's newly rebuilt shop, Keel settled contentedly on his bed, while Delaney helped organize case files. Their work wasn't quite finished. There would be trials and testimony ahead. But the hardest part was behind them. The truth had come to light, justice was being served, and healing could truly begin. As the sun set outside, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Harlan watched Delaney playing with Keel. Her laughter mixed with the dog's happy barks, creating a melody of joy he'd thought he might never hear again. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest gifts come disguised as challenges, and sometimes the path through grief leads not back to what was lost, but forward to something new and equally precious. Delaney caught him watching and smiled, her eyes bright with understanding and affection. Keel bounded between them, tail wagging, as if to say this was exactly where they all belonged. Together they had uncovered the truth, protected the innocent, and found their way to each other. It was more than justice served, it was love restored, hope renewed, and the promise of better days ahead. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.